All right, hello, Graphic Design 1. We're going to do our first Photoshop assignment. So for this assignment, the first thing I want to tell you guys are the differences between Photoshop and Illustrator. So typically in Illustrator, you go to File, New, and then you create something on your artboard from scratch. When we're working in Photoshop, particularly for this class, we're going to do something a little bit different. So instead of doing File, New, we're going to already have pictures that we're going to edit. And so instead of File, New, we're going to say File, Open. By this time, you guys should have already gone out to take your pictures for your Too Much Ad assignment. So what you're going to do is get those pictures onto your computer somehow. And then when you do File, Open, you're going to find those pictures, and open them in Photoshop. So I'm just going to go ahead and find my photos here. So I've got 4 pictures that I'm going to select. So I'm just going to hold Control and click on all 4. And then now that all 4 of them have that blue highlight, I can press Open. Photoshop does tend to be a little bit slower than Illustrator. So if it's thinking a long time about what it's doing, just let it do its thing, because the more that you click on stuff while it's loading, the longer it's going to take to load, and possibly your whole computer could crash. So just let it do its thing, let it open and take a little bit to do so, which is exactly what we're doing here. So I'm just waiting for my pictures to open. So now that I have all 4 of my pictures open, what I'm going to do is arrange them so they're all on the same document. So basically, when you have different tabs up here in Photoshop, that means those are all the different documents that you have open. So right now it has all 4 of my images open as separate documents, but I want them all to be on one document together. So all I have to do is figure out which one of these is going to be my first picture, which I think is going to be this one. I'm going to go ahead and unlock that background. So in your layers in the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to click on that little lock button so that it goes away. And now you're able to edit that photo. And then I'm going to click on the next one and do the same thing. But now I'm going to go with my Move tool. So your Move tool is the V as in Victor on your keyboard. And it's similar to our Selection tool in Illustrator, but it's called the Move tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that guy. And all I'm going to do is click on this image and drag it into the layer that I want to work in, into the tab that I want to work in. So you can see I've got my mouse with a little plus sign next to it. That means that I'm adding a new image to this file. So I'm going to go ahead and let go of my mouse now. That entire time I was holding down on my mouse, holding on to the picture. So I'm going to do that again. So if you are confused or you missed it, I'm going to go to the 3rd picture now. And then again, I'm going to unlock that layer. And then I'm going to use my Move tool to click and drag. I am still holding on to my mouse. I'm going to go into the tab that I'm working in. I'm still holding down on my mouse. And now I'm going to let go. So now I've got 3 pictures in my layers and I need 1 more. So I'm going to come back here to the 4th one and do the same thing. Click and drag this guy into the layer that I want to work in. And now I have all 4 of my pictures in my layers over here. So let's actually make that bigger. I don't need to see my colors as big. So now I can see all my layers down here. And what I want to do is align all of these pictures so that they are in the correct orientation, right? So right now you can see they're like overlapping each other. They're not perfectly sitting on top of each other. So what we're going to do in order to select all of those pictures is we need to select them in layers, right? So when we were working in Illustrator, we could click on an object and then hold Shift and click on the next object. In Photoshop, it works a lot easier if you just select the layers of the objects that you want to edit. So what I'm going to do over here, I've already got the top layer selected. So I'm going to hold Shift on my keyboard and I'm going to click on the bottom layer. And so now you'll see that all 4 of my layers are highlighted. And then I'm going to use the alignment tools on the top of my screen. So up here on the top of your screen, you're going to see a couple of rectangles and lines. Those are our alignment tools. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Align Center, which means all of my pictures just went aligned to the middle. I'm also going to align them to the tops of each other. So if I go ahead and click on this guy here, that will align everything to the top. So now everything has been moved to the middle and then moved to the top. So you can see they're all stacked on top of each other, nice and even. And now, because they're all still selected, I can use my move tool to just move them to the center of my artboard. You'll know that it's the center of your artboard when you see those pink highlights that show you the crosshairs right there, right? So now I can let go, and now all of my layers are in the right orientation, right? So they're all stacked perfectly on top of one another. They are all right now also still selected. So right now in my layers, they're all still highlighted. And if I want to no longer do that, and I just want to work in one of those layers, then I need to click off and then click back on the layer that I want to edit. Okay, so I actually want to go ahead and switch the order of these. So I want the picture that has the picture of me all the way to the left. I want that to be on top. So let's go ahead and make this layer number 1. So I'm going to double click in my layers, and then I'm going to change the title of that to just the number 1. And then I'm going to drag it all the way to the top. And then the next one should be this guy where I'm in the middle and I'm like holding a book, right? So we're going to double click on that guy, make it a number 2, and then put it in the number 2 spot. And then the third one should be the one where I'm like holding the pens. So again, we're going to double click on that guy, make it a number 3, move it up. And then the last one is going to be the one where I'm standing all the way to the left, and then we're going to label that one number 4. So right now, all of your layers should be labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, with the picture of me being moved across the image, right? So I've got the picture of me that's all the way to the right where I'm writing. Then in the next layer, I've got the picture of me where I'm holding the book. And then the next one would be the picture of me where I'm holding the pens. And the last one would be the picture where I'm just standing all the way to the left. Okay, so now that I have all of my layers in the correct order, we're going to go ahead and use the masking option to bring all of those versions of me into the same image, right? Because right now, this picture where I'm all the way to the right is covering all of the other versions of me. And I need to make a hole in this picture so that I can see what's underneath, right? So for this one, I need to make a hole or a part where I can see through this picture to what's underneath. And when I do that, I need to do it for this entire section over here. So what I'm going to do in my layers, first I'm going to click on the picture for number 1. And then I'm going to look for the icon that looks like a white square with a black circle in it. And that's going to be our mask option. So I'm going to go ahead and add a layer mask by clicking that button. And now I want to be super, super careful to make sure that in my layers, the little like brackets around the picture are highlighted on the mask and not the photo. Right? So if I'm looking over here in my layers, I've got this little like outline of some brackets around the outside of the white square, and that's good. That means I'm going to be editing the mask, right? But if I click on the picture then you can see those brackets moved from the white square to the picture. And that means that I would be editing my photo instead of editing the mask. Okay, so I need us to make sure that those little brackets are surrounding the white square. And then we're going to use our Marquee tool. So the Marquee tool is located right here. You could also press the letter M on your keyboard. But what we're going to do with this is we're going to select the entire left side of this picture. So I'm going to click and drag and get a selection that is the entire left side. So what I need to do is make sure that I don't get any part of that book. I just want everything that's from this point all the way to the left. So I can tell that I've selected it correctly. If you see those little dashes, or sometimes people call them marching ants, right? So you're going to see those little black and white dashes going across your selection. And now that I have an area that I've selected that I want to make a hole in, now I can go with my Paintbucket tool, which is located underneath the gradient tool. So if I click and hold on to the gradient tool here, then I can look for the Paintbucket tool. And all I'm going to do is make sure that my color down here is black and not white. So right here, you want to make sure that the color that you're painting with, the color you're painting with your Paintbucket tool, is black, which would be set as the foreground color. If yours looks the opposite of mine, just go ahead and click this little arrow right here to switch the colors, right? So if you're painting with white, this is not going to work. You need to paint with black. So we're going to switch that so that it's the black option. And then we're going to go ahead and just click once in our selected area. And then you're going to notice that that little picture of me where I'm holding the book shows up, right? Because that's the layer that's underneath. So what we just did, if you look in the white square on our layers, we just made a black section of the mask, which essentially cut a hole in that photo so that we could see the layer underneath, right? So we're going to repeat that process. So if you're a little bit confused, don't worry about it. We're going to do it again. So first thing I need to do before I move on to do those steps again is I need to deselect my selection. So I still have a selection here, and I don't want that same selection when I make a new mask. So I need to deselect, which means that I'm going to do Control D on my keyboard, D as in dog. And then those little marching ants disappear. Okay, so now I'm going to click on my number 2 picture. And then again, I'm going to click on the Add a Layer mask on the bottom. And I'm also going to go back to my Marquee tool. And this time I'm going to select everything to the left of the second version of me. So I've got 1 picture of me and 2 pictures of me. And now I'm going to select everything to the left of this side. So I'm going to go ahead and make a selection here. And now that I have my selection, I want to double check that the brackets in my layer number 2 are around the white mask and not the photo. And they are, which is good. So now again, I'm going to go to my Paintbucket tool, double check that I'm painting with black, and I'm just going to click once inside of this selection. And then again, you'll see that third picture of me go ahead is now available, right? So now I have 1, 2, 3, and I got to do 1 more. So again, before I move on to the next step, I'm going to do Control D to deselect. I'm going to click on layer number 3. I'm going to add a layer mask. I'm going to go with the Marquee tool and select everything to the left of that third version of me. And then I'm going to go ahead and do another hole in that picture. So again, I'm going to go with the Paintbucket tool, paint with black, and click once. and then that next picture shows up there. So again, I'm going to deselect by doing Control D. And now I have a little bit of cleaning up to do. So using the Marquee tool, I was able to get most of what I needed. But if we zoom in here, you're going to notice a couple of things. First of all, my hands are missing here. Also, the colors of the pictures, like the shadows, are a little bit different in these three pictures. So there's these lines in between. We're going to need to get rid of those. And then also you can see when I did my marquee for this last one that I kind of cut off my hip right here. So there's a few things I'm going to need to fix. And the way that we're going to fix those is by using the brush tool. So again, everything that we're editing right now is in the masks. So whenever I make an edit, I need to make sure that in my layers, I have the mask selected and not the photo. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the mask for layer number 2, because that's the layer that has the picture with me holding the book. And that's the one that's covering my hand, right? So if I turn this little eyeball over here on layer number 2 off, you're going to see that my hands with the pens in them, they show back up, right? Because layer number 2 is covering layer number 3. And so that is the mask that we need to edit. So when you're trying to figure out what part of the mask or which layer you're trying to change so that you can see something underneath it, using this little eyeball over here works really well, right? So if I turn that eyeball off, I know that layer number 2 is covering layer number 3, which has the pens and my hands that I need to bring back into the front so that I can see it. So I'm selecting that mask on layer number 2, and then I'm going to use the brush tool. So the brush tool is the letter B on your keyboard, B as in brush. And when you click on that, you're going to see that you get like a little white circle on the screen. In order to make that white circle bigger, which is the size of our brush, we're going to use the brackets on our keyboard. So those brackets, the right bracket makes it smaller, and the left bracket makes it bigger. Right? So this size of brush is too big. It would bring back too much, right? So I'm going to make it a reasonable size. The other things that you could change, if you click up here next to the little circle that shows what you're going to be painting, there's a little arrow, and you can change the hardness of your brush. So hardness means how hard the edges are. So if the hardness is at 0%, then that means it has a really soft edge. But if you bring this hardness up, then that means that it will have a really jagged edge, a really hard edge, because you've made the hardness 100%. We're going to leave it as a softer edge, and that'll be good enough for now. So now I can zoom in here, and I'm just going to paint with black on this mask and bring back my hands. So now I can see my hands. What I can also do is on this third layer, I can bring back my hip, right? So remember my hip got cut off here, but to do that, I need to do the opposite. So what was happening with my hands was that there was something covering it that we needed to see through, right? And what's happening with this portion is that we covered too much of it. We need to put the whole back. We need to put some paper back, right? So what I'm going to do instead is paint with white. So I'm going to switch my colors, and I'm going to paint with white to put it back. So when you paint with black, you're making a hole in the picture. When you're painting with white, you're putting back the original picture and covering it back up again, right? So what I could do over here, because if we notice, I took away too much around my hand, right? Too much of my shoulder is now missing. So I could make my brush smaller, and I could paint with white on layer number 2 to bring that back. However, that gets a little bit tedious because of how close my hand is to my shoulder. So what I like to do is make a selection So we're going to, instead of using the Marquee tool, we're going to use the Lasso tool, and we're going to use the Polygonal Lasso tool. So if you click and hold on to the Lasso tool and then click on the one that looks like it makes angles, then what we're going to do is we're going to make a selection by clicking around the pens here. And my hand. I'm just doing my best to do a good selection, getting as close as I can to the part that I need to edit. And then when you're done, you're going to notice that there's like a little circle next to the Polygonal Lasso tool icon. And that means that you're going to finish your selection. So you need to finish your selection wherever you started. Kind of like the pen tool, when you make a shape with the pen tool, that's kind of what this is like, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and click there. And then my little marching ants came back, right? And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna paint with white inside of that space. So now if I paint with white here, then it's gonna have that nice harsh edge. And if I do Control D to deselect and I zoom back out, now I've got my hands looking like they're on top of my shoulder, right? So again, paint with black to make a hole, paint with white to put the picture back. Okay, so I could spend a lot of time fixing these edges here. I'm not going to. I'm going to let you guys do that on your own. But what we're going to do in the meantime is do some cropping. So if you notice, you can see on the bottom of this picture, I've got like the edge of the table that I was using to keep my phone stable while I was taking the photos. You can see the edge of it here. And we don't want to have that in our advertisement. So I'm going to go ahead and crop this. So I'm going to go with my crop tool or the letter C on your keyboard. And then this is really similar to when you crop any other picture in any other program. You're just going to move the edges where you want them to be. I'm also going to crop out the right side of the picture because there's too much empty space over here. So I'm going to go ahead and click and drag this guy in a little bit so that it looks more centered, just like that. And then to save our crop, you're going to go ahead and press enter. All right, so now I've got a nice image here that has 4 of me inside of it, and I have to decide what my advertisement is going to be for. So because I took pictures using my pens, I'm going to make this advertisement for Micron pen because that's the type of pen that I'm holding. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer. So I'm going to click on the topmost layer and then click on the little plus sign at the bottom to make a new layer. And inside of that layer, I need to make another selection. But before I do that, let's pick some colors that we think look nice. So let's go ahead and go with our eyedropper tool or the letter I on your keyboard. And then I just want you to like click in a few places of colors that you think you could use in your advertisement, right? So maybe this dark blue and this light blue and a couple different greens from the background, maybe some greens from my shirt, maybe the blue from my pants. And then you'll notice over here in the top right-hand corner, if you go to swatches, all of those colors that I just clicked on are saved in those recently used swatches, right? So I've got a whole bunch of colors over here that match the general vibe of my photo that I've created. And what I'm going to do is pick some of those colors to test out to make a banner on the top of this image. So let's go ahead and make our selection now. Remember, when we're doing this, I want you to make a new layer. So I've already got my new layer down here. And then I'm going to go with my Marquee tool and make a selection at the top. that's just like a nice big rectangle. And I'm going to fill that rectangle with a color. So I'm going to go with my Paintbucket tool. I'm going to click, let's try this light green, see what that looks like. So now that over here, first, let me back up. First, I'm clicking on the Paintbucket tool, and then I'm clicking on the swatches that we created to choose different colors to try out there. So I'm going to go ahead and click here. That's the teal color. I'm not really liking that vibe so much. Let's try the green. I think that looks nice. What about the dark green? No, I don't like the dark green as much. So let's go with this light green. So that's going to be like the banner for our advertisement. So we've got the 4 different pictures and then the banner. And now we need to add some text. But before we do that, let's go ahead and deselect this square. So we're going to do Control D. And we're going to do a new layer. And we're going to enter some text. So I'm going to go with my text tool over here. And I'm just going to click once. And then we can zoom in so we can see what we got going on. Okay. And then I'm going to write in all caps the title of my pen. So it's Micron pen. And then in my, let's see, properties, I can change the size. So if I go down here to like the little icon that looks like a small T and a big T, I can click there and make it bigger, but I have to highlight it first. Let's try that again. So now it's much bigger and it'll be easier to see. I think I'm also over here going to change the color right now. So let's change the color to white. And we'll go ahead and go with our move tool next. And we want to transform this so that it's much larger, right? So I can click and move this wherever I want, but I can't make it bigger until I transform it. And the hotkey to transform something is Control T. So I'm just going to make sure that my Micron pen text layer is highlighted, and then I'm going to do Control T. And then now I'm going to get those little boxes that'll tell me that I can resize it. So I'm going to go ahead and make it much bigger. Now, here's another thing that's different from Illustrator. In Photoshop, it automatically is going to keep things the same aspect ratio. So no matter how much I try to resize this right now, it's always going to stay in the same aspect ratio. So you're not going to be able to stretch it or warp it in any way. If you want to stretch or warp this, you would have to hold Shift and then try to resize it, right? So if I wanted to make it a little bit different, I would hold Shift and stretch it out a little bit. There are some other things that we can do underneath properties over here. So if we wanted to kind of stretch out how far apart the letters are, we can highlight all of our letters again and then make the spacing in between the letters larger. Sometimes that looks really nice. So let's go ahead and do that there, which means that we also need to resize it again. So I'll click on it and do Control T and make it fit in the space. And then in order to save your transformation, you just press Enter on your keyboard, and now it's kind of saved your edit. And that's the basics of this assignment. So there are some things that you're going to have to do on your own to finish this. So for example, I would need to fix these lines here where I could see all the different shadows. I would also need to add like a tagline underneath here. So some extra words that could be like things that describe the Micron pen. And then after this, what you're going to do is you're going to save it two different ways, right? So we're going to file, save as. You can save in your Creative Cloud or you can save on your computer. I'm going to save here, and then basically I'm going to give it the title. So I'm going to put my last name, Too Much Ad, save. And it's going to give you a little pop-up that says, do you want to maximize the capability? Yes, yes I do. So you'll say okay. And then it will save it as a Photoshop file. And then after you save it as a Photoshop file, if you feel like you're done, you would then also do File, Export, Export As. And then we're going to export it as a JPEG. We're going to make sure the quality says excellent. And then you're going to be able to press export, this little blue button down here at the bottom. And you'll save that somewhere on your computer so that you can turn it into the Google Classroom. So that is the first thing we're doing in Photoshop. Hopefully that was helpful. Good luck.